I think what I've noticed is that your story is, and because like we've met before, we've hung out before. Your other label, I reference quite a lot, This and That Tapes. Or not your other label, but kind of the origin stories. But I feel like as I dig through what you've done, what I know, your story is one of iteration, and it's like sanding the edges and pivoting within the art scene in various different ways. And so I want to track back to how we got to where we are today, Consonant Collective as a label and an art collective. But take us back. How far does this go? Like, where is the origins of this story?
Sure. It's funny you said rounding the edges. My partner Katie and I just got into rock hounding. So we've been tumbling stones, and it's like a 5-step process. So it's sort of funny to think of getting into Consonant Collective as maybe one of the final steps, but who knows?
Sorry to interrupt you, but the other analogy I had while typing that question was this like big block of stone and then trying to get it down to David.
Yeah, it's what it feels like. I've tried so many different things, and none of them, none of the hats have fit quite right, but this one feels great so far. So I mean, the origin, I guess, goes back to making my first zines in college, around the 2006, 2007 time. And they were music-oriented zines. What I did was I had like a CD contest and asked friends to make CDs for me, and then I made what I considered the booklet to go inside a CD. And that was like my first zine.
Nice.
And that sort of started my path of wanting to make things myself. Mm-hmm. From there, I took zines pretty seriously. I started doing zines for hire. The more I did that, the more people I met. And I kept wanting to work in music. This iteration of my life probably took off around 2017 when I approached Joyful Noise Recordings about making zines for some of their releases. And there I met, Kishibashi, Tall Tall Trees, Sound of Series, Deerhoof, No Joy. I made zines with all those people, Serengeti.
Amazing. I didn't know that part of your story. That's very cool.
Yeah, that's sort of like where music first entered my zine making.
Okay.
And then, as I did more of that, I started to think about some of my friends who were in bands. And I was like, well, Rabbits to Riches was this great Philadelphia sort of like indie pop band. They were some friends of mine, and they had 2 albums, no ways of selling them except their Bandcamp. And so I thought, might be fun to try being like a band manager, which basically was just me making all of their merch. So I made their t-shirts, I made, download cards that were tiny zines in their own. We started making cassettes. And then at one point, Chris Baldy's, their guitarist, was like, you should just be our label too. And that was sort of the origin of how I started This and That Tapes. And that was about 2018.
Did you have a familiarity with labels or what a label was prior to that?
I mean, probably more of a familiarity than most people do,
Sure.
But I'd never worked for a label. I'd been working in publishing for about 10 years. I was doing like SAT books and consultations for companies, which is where I learned how to do design work. But so I had a strong desire to DIY everything. And I really like music. I've never been one of those people who has a favorite band from 20 years ago that I still listen to. I mean, I'll pop on.
Really?
But, my music taste changed so frequently, and what I listen to changes so much that it was sort of exciting to meet all these new bands and work with them.
I'm the complete opposite. I've been getting more and more rigid as I get older, and now I only listen to records from 20 years ago. I mean, that's not true. There's a couple genres, right? But I'm very like, if somebody plays me something new, I'm just like, no, I don't want to listen to something. And then I'm like, okay, it's not bad.
I get it. I mean, to each their own. Everyone's got their own things that they like.
Yeah.
And it's been, a curse and a blessing, because one of the things I really admire about Joyful Noise is how many like artists from the 80s and 90s they work with and really promote their new work, trying to say like, all right, so we all remember this guy from Sevedo, but what is he doing now? And that's, I have some artists who, had a big-ish band in the 90s or 80s who I'm working with now. It's just fun to think about what's new too.
Yeah, Joyful Noise, that's such a great model. And I had done I was working on a project a couple years ago. I can't remember what it was. I was almost like a case studies thing. And I was diving into Joyful Noise and some of the stuff that they do, like some of a lot of people just aren't aware of how deep their offerings go, and some of their kind of subscription services and like their membership stuff that they do, and they have a rabid fan base. People really, that was a popular episode we did back years and years ago with them, and people love them. It's a good model. I gotta zoom out for a second, or actually zoom in on zines. Is a question in my on my list today, and you've talked about it quite a bit. Tell me a bit about zines and their connection to the music scene, because I was never exposed to them in my years of being a music fan for whatever reason. But on this show, there's been a number of labels who have started out as a zine in high school or in the 90s or in the 2000s. Or who are still doing zines as part of their label. Can you just educate me a little bit on like what is a zine and why is it so connected to the music industry, indie music industry?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, so zines go back, you can trace them back hundreds of years if you want to be like super archivist style. When did printing begin? But for modern day, I think the zines that we think of now really grew out of the like 80s, 90s punk and riot girl scene, which was like basically a rejection of popular music magazines.
I see.
A way to say, if you're at this show and you're at this merch table and you buy this zine, you're going to like all the bands we talk about in it. So it was like a really great sort of like indie distribution model, a great way to sort of get the word out there and sort of be your own magazine. And I think the zines that exist today, or maybe I should say even more, the zines that were more popular in the early 2000s when I started making them, were heavily modeled after those 80s and 90s and maybe even 70s zines. I just found this great zine from the 1977 called Hot Wax. And it's someone's record review zine. It's like a rock zine. And they're not calling it a zine, they're calling it a magazine, but it's, entirely self-laid out, entirely self-printed, self-distributed. And so that's sort of where the zines that I'm working with come from. I can actually show you Hit the Decks is a zine that I do that I consider like a DIY magazine. It's like a review of cassettes. It's interviews with labels. I was going to ask you if you wanted to do an interview at some point for one of the issues coming up.
Yes. Did I respond to that email? I thought.
I don't know.
I thought I did.
I don't know if I've formally asked you yet.
Oh. I got an email from you or somebody about that. I'm pretty sure I did. Anyway, that's interesting. And the one that you show for our listeners, often they're black and white, right? Often they're like, because they're DIY, because they, photocopiers is so cheap, right? Like it's a penny for a black and white page. And so you really can make something that's great. And it's and unlike an average magazine, it's not 60% ads. It's either no ads or it's very relevant ads. And it's so specific to a certain genre or topic. It makes me wonder a little bit about Tape Op. Are you familiar with that magazine, Tape Op?
Sure. Yeah.
I wonder if that's kind of like a zine in a way, because it's very low budget, like user funded kind of thing.
Yeah. There comes a point where there's a real blurring of the lines between what is a zine and what isn't. I did a panel a couple years ago at the Phoenix Zine Fest about zine libraries, because Katie, my partner, and I actually have about 1,600 catalog zines that we collect, and you can come peruse the collection.
Wow.
And so I did a panel about zine libraries, and one person's definition of what a zine is that it can't have an ISBN number. Or a barcode, which at this point most of ours do, because we're distributing them on a much larger scale than we ever used to. So it's like it's blurred lines. It's hard to tell what's a zine and what isn't at times.
And so in the music scene, are they centered around genres, subcultures, that kind of thing?
I would say they're more centered around. I mean, it's hard to say, because there are at this point, there are just tons of zines.
Okay. Yeah.
There's like Maximum and Minimum Rock and Roll have been around for a long time. Those have been sort of punk oriented. But then there's like we've got one here in West Philly. I forget exactly what it's called, Cherry Street or something like that. And it's just about the Philly music scene. So I would say more than genre oriented, they're usually scene oriented.
Okay. Oh, that would make sense. So then people subscribe to these things, right? And they pay in the same way they do a magazine in some cases?
Could be. I mean, if people have their stuff together, I often am not thinking that far ahead with the zine. It's sort of like, I spend all day trying to make things on my own as perfectly as I can. And then Hit the Decks as a place where my brain can go to collage and do black and white and invite people to write one sentence about their favorite record. And I don't need to edit everything that's in it. And so it's, for me, we do have a few zines. Like Katie and I made one called Cryptid Trip about like Bigfoot hunting that we put out with an 8-inch record. And that one, we did a few hundred copies. We wanted to be as perfect as it could be. But then there are just times where I just need to sort of play, and Hit the Decks is great for that.
Right, I see. And oftentimes, do they follow that monthly or quarterly model, or are they more sporadic or one-off?
It really depends. Maximum Rock and Roll has been doing a few a year, every year for decades. Actually, I don't know what their model is right now, but that's how it was. Hit the Decks, I started in 2021, and we're just about to do the 4th issue. And it was more like we did 2 issues in 1 year, skipped a year, 3rd issue, and now the 4th. So it's maybe more like an annual zine magazine.
Yeah. Should indie labels, like our audience, should indie labels have some sort of PR strategy to getting their music into a zine? I gotta think that somebody reading about an album in a zine may have a greater impact than getting written about on a blog or even on a big website these days. So
I 100% agree.
Yeah. So how do we go about finding these zines, pitching to them?
I would say probably the best place to look is Instagram. Look through hashtags, look for something like Music Zine. Etsy is a good place to find them. I'm sure if you there's no so there are a few bigger zine distributors. Antiquated Future is up in Portland. They have an amazing collection of zines, and they have a lot of music zines. Microcosm Publishing, also in Portland. Quimby's is in New York and Chicago. They both have great zine selections. That would be a good place to just look up music in the zine section, see what comes up. But I would absolutely reach out to them, because zinesters, I would say most zines are looking for content and like to write about things and like to connect with people. Trading is such a big part of zine making that you could send a couple albums, get a couple of zines, and you might get written up on. But you already know that it's a community of people who like DIY things, who like lo-fi things. So if you're looking for some kind of press, I would say you're much more likely to find people in zines who would want to listen to your music if you connect to that zine than if you, even, sometimes I look at a Stereo Gum article that has, 0 comments, and it seems like for as big of a site as that is, this music announcement just sort of disappears.
100%. Yeah, I completely agree, and it's an interesting approach. What about like advertising in zines? I mean, would there be would it be worthwhile for a record label to buy a 1-page ad to advertise a couple of their releases if they were to do it in a DIY personal way and not just like a traditional Spin magazine ad?
Yeah, I think so. I have a zine right here. Maybe I don't anymore. If I can find it soon, I'll email it to you so you can see what it is. But a lot of zines, not a lot, but you can find some that do like classifieds on the back cover.
Okay.
And $5 and you get like a sentence or two or a little image. Most people will just, if you send them a page with something about your album, we'll just put it in there and you won't have to pay anything.
Yeah.
But again, it's all about like a personal connection. If you're running a record label and you have a form email and you obviously don't know what the zine is, and you say like, hey, Rockstar, I think this would be great for your zine. Puke up your guts, that's not gonna work.
Yeah. No,
You know,
that's a great point. I feel like, I mean, this is, in line with everything that you do. I find that there's so many analog things in our lives that are maybe like direct responses to just how overly digital our lives have become otherwise. And zines and printed stuff, they're so unnecessary because, it's easier to have a PDF or a website. And yet they're so welcomed. They're like, obviously there's a group of people in your space who are obsessed with them and live and die by them. I find it's really cool how this and vinyl and lathes and cassettes and zines is something we haven't covered on this show. I regret that now, but just about how people who want to slow down, people who want to be offline more. I mean, none of us are going to be completely offline, but any chance that we can, especially as a way to experience community and to experience art, I find like there's just a real demand for that.
Yeah, well, one of the interesting things about it is, how many interviews have I done about, did the internet kill zines? It's like, it's a topic that never ends around zines. But one of the things about it is that my experience of them hasn't changed all that much since, 2005 when I first started doing them, or 2006, when the internet wasn't as much of a force in our lives as it is now. Because back then, the reason I got into zines was because, you publish a poem, you publish a piece of writing in a magazine, it shows up somewhere in the world. Some people read it, you're almost never going to hear from anyone about it. And it almost starts to feel like, why did I even do this thing?
Yeah, yeah.
But zines have always been a way for you to look at someone in the eyes sometimes at an event and hand them a piece of your work and say, I made this. And then they usually read it and will often write an email saying, hey, I met you at the Philly Zine Fest. I loved your zine about Bigfoot. I can't believe you wrote a Bigfoot song. It's this way of connection that still hasn't been replaced by the internet.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. You said that you worked in publishing before doing the record label. There's got to be a lot of similarities there when it comes to creating something, creating a product, then having to promote it and distribute it. Is there not?
I mean, Scott, this is the problem. This is why we did the clarity call about what Consonant Collective is. Because, am I a publisher? Am I a record label? I don't know. Right. It's like the same thing, just one is books and one is music, but they actually operate, at least at my level, very similarly.
It's funny. I didn't even realize this when we talked on our call a couple of weeks ago, but I'm a huge book fan. I love magazines. I love there's a DJ magazine I buy that's $50. It comes out yearly. I love books. I love paper products. I'm always reading through many different books, music books, business books, but I also love records. I feel like, and I buy an equal amount and I consume an equal amount on a daily basis. And I love both of those products. I think they're so similar. It's a shame to me that more record labels aren't existing in that space where they do books or zines or both, as well as records, cassettes. I mean, Shelter Press is a great example. I love that label. But I mean, to me, labels who do books and records, I think in a lot of cases, they're a similar audience. I feel like we should be seeing more of it.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, it's like at this point, so one of the biggest artists I work with, or one of the artists I work most closely with, is Spencer Moody. He was the vocalist for Murder City Devils, or still is. They're still touring often. And, Dead Low Tide, Blind Seekers, a lot of music over the years. But it's hard to say which sells more, his poetry or his music.
Wow.
But, in the last 6 years, I've probably put out more of his poetry. But it's a totally, I don't know, it's that old idea of like, what is a song but a poem with music? It's like most musicians, I would say, who are songwriters are good writers as well, and usually willing, or at least have written something at some point. And most of the fans who like someone's music are probably going to like their writing too.
And it also, I mean, we're talking about books now, but it also really goes to the extreme where when you're a fan of an artist, you like whatever it is they create. If they create a product line, if they open a restaurant, you are drawn to that because you believe in them as a creative. And I think artists are not being prolific enough outside of music.
I agree. I think one of the really interesting things that's come up from it too is that I expected musicians to want to do some writing. What I didn't expect was so many writers to want to make some music, because we publish some zines and books for other writers as well. And sometimes they come to us and they say, all right, I want to do this poetry record, and a friend of mine is going to write the music that I'm going to read over. Or, Katie, my partner in Consonant Collective, we did a book for her called Spirit Box that was like sort of meme art poetry. And she made this excellent cassette of like electronic music to go along with it, which surprised me. And we've been together, 15 years. It's really neat to see once you get some creative people going, they're interested in a lot of stuff.
That's so true. Let's go back to this collective then, and the Consonant Collective. And as you've been taking this stone and chiseling it down, tell me all of the things that you do now, all of the things that make up your business, really, because this is what we talk about a little bit, record labels as businesses, and I know this is your job. And so tell me all of the things you do under this umbrella.
Sure. All right,
or the top 5, the top 10.
Yeah, right. I know. I was going to say, how long is this podcast? It's sort of, you can think of it like a tree with branches. The trunk is me and Katie. We're married. We've been together a long time. We've supported each other's work and worked together for, basically the entire time we've been together. Even before that, we did our first scene together. Awesome. And it just started to feel like every album I put out, she's editing all the text on it. She's writing some of the text. Every book that she does, I'm doing most of the design. Maybe it's time that we just give ourselves one name. So Consonant Collective now, it is our zines. It's our cassettes that we've put out, although we're leaning away from cassettes now that we're doing lathe-cut records. We have 3 lathe-cut machines. So we put out our own zines and books and records. We put out zines and records for other people. We have sort of a small roster of artists we work with usually, but we also open that to other people when the project is right. We do lathe cutting services for 6, 7, and 8-inch records at the moment. So if someone wants 50 records made, we could do that. And luckily it ties in with everything else. We have a risograph printer in our house. We have a huge inkjet printer. So we print the labels, we do the jackets, we do all that stuff. Katie offers editing services. So she's a professional editor as her job. So we do that for people's zines and books and newsletters as they want it. And I would say those are the big 4: zines, books, records, record cutting, editing.
I think this approach to running a business is essential, especially today when it's kind of one revenue stream is not really sustainable for most people. I mean, like 1% of businesses can get away with that. But I think your approach is what everyone should be doing. And I've done episodes about it, and I've talked about it in everything I've done. Having said that, I know from our clarity call a couple of weeks ago, it creates a bit of fog in your brain, and it creates a bit of an identity crisis. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. I mean, that's what killed This and That Tapes, my idea of a record label. I was doing zines, I was doing records, we were doing some books. The biggest thing that killed the label is when we pressed our first record during the first year of the pandemic, and the record took about 14 months from when we submitted everything to when the records were sent to me.
That was a bad time.
It was a ridiculous amount of time. And by the time I got the records, the label had begun to feel like I was working in a mailroom more than I was creatively involved in something. So more than anything, our multiple revenue streams sort of presented themselves naturally out of a desire to be involved in each part, to sort of have the fun of making the book and zine. We don't hire a printer and send it out and just get a box of them. Just like the records, I don't find it especially satisfying to get records made and sent to me. So now we have the lathes, and if we want to make 6 of a record, we can make 6 of them. I think I've possibly gotten off topic of what your original question was, but
well, I know I want to. But this is all good. It's all the reason why you did it. But we talked about the identity crisis of having a brand that does all of these different things. How do you communicate that to your audience?
Right. So I was communicating it poorly. I was using the name Displaced Snail, which was sort of my zine name from 20 years ago, and using that as an umbrella space to sell things. But the idea of a collective, it's really about just giving people the architecture to understand something immediately. And so we're calling ourselves Consonant Collective. It's an arts collective, and we're still using the tagline lo-fi, high fun. So people know there's
the
art
best,
here.
by the way, the best. If they have Oscars or Grammys for tags, that's it. There you go.
And it really does communicate so much. I feel, we're telling people right off the bat, this is a collection of products from a number of people, and they're all going to be in this lo-fi realm, but you're going to enjoy them.
Well, let me interject here, because the question I have about Consonant Collective, and this is more of it's a question / statement, but it feels to me like it's okay. What does collective mean? Generally, we think a community, we think of a group of like-minded people, but I think for you, it's like what I observe. Tell me if I'm wrong. You are a collective of like-minded people, but the collective also means you're a collective of projects or of like-minded projects. Is that true for you?
Yes, that's a very good way of putting it. Yeah.
Good.
I would say.
Well, that's what I got. I was like, is this a collective in the sense that they're a group of people, or is it a collective in the sense that there's a bunch of different projects like records and zines that are all sort of related? And I was like, yes.
Right. Yeah. I mean, so we have had the experience before of showing up to the Zine Fest and feeling more like a storefront, like a pop-up shop. There's records, posters, there's zines, there's books, there's, it's not necessarily, because I've been the person at the Zine Fest with my first zine, and I have 3 issues of it, and it's me sitting at the table with my zine, and that's the usual Zine Fest experience. But, when you find us there, when you find us at the punk rock flea market, when you find us at the Winter Fest, the table looks a bit more like a store now. So we had to think of what is a name that people at the Zine Fest, at the Record Bazaar, at the, community center flea market will understand.
Okay. I want our listeners to pause the treadmill for a second and take out their notepad, because I feel like when you say the word storefront, that is a huge thing for a lot of people, because other labels that I've interviewed or I'm friends with that do this well, what you're doing, have this storefront approach. And in some cases, like you, they're carrying other people's products, not just their own artists. They're doing Japanese imports. They're selling other labels, records, and taking a little profit like any retailer would. They're selling products in the like-minded range, or zines or books. And they're doing that really well. And I just think of the labels who kind of come to me and say, we have 1 or 2 releases. I don't feel like we're making enough money. We're not sustainable yet. How many releases do I need to be sustainable? Blah, blah, blah. And it's like, you're a storefront. And if you have 1 record, you're not a great storefront. If you have 2 records, you're not a great storefront. Imagine walking down those beautiful little streets with the shops, opening a door, and there's 1 product in there. You'd be like, okay, awkwardly walk out and be like, thank you. The bell rings on the door. So anyway, sorry, I just love the term storefront. And I think if more labels thought of themselves as a storefront, whether or not they're going to do a bunch of different products or not, they might reach sustainability quicker.
Yeah, I mean, there's Microcosm Publishing up in Portland does this fascinating thing where you can buy, this knowledge is a few years old, so maybe reference it on the website. Everyone was interested. But they were selling boxes that were meant to be sold at your merch table. It was a box that would fold out and look like a book rack, and it came with 20 books or 20 zines that were music oriented. And the idea was, if you're going on tour, you can buy this box of books and zines for $100, and you can sell them for $20 each at your merch table. And it's just a way for you to have a fuller table while supporting a cool, indie press. And
amazing.
A part of this distribution process. It's such a fantastic idea.
That's incredible. Yeah, I'd never thought about that. And I mean, think of that, a merch table. Most bands have 2 records, maybe 1 vinyl and a couple CDs, maybe 1 shirt. And I, as a music fan, I would go, I don't wear a lot of band shirts. So oftentimes they're crap quality. So it's like, I don't want to buy that. I'm pretty picky with what vinyl I have in my collection, and I don't buy CDs anymore, but I want to support you. What do I do? But yeah, if you're selling a zine or a book in the music industry that, the history of vinyl or whatever, like, I'd be like, I'll buy that. You're going to make just as much of a profit as you would on the CD. That's genius, man. That is
Isn't
genius.
it? And the one time that I saw it in person and bought something from it, I like forever in my head, I'm like, I bought that at that Talkie Head show. Now I remember the band, even though I didn't buy one of their t-shirts or something.
Well, and I mean, if they're great marketers, that book can be signed on the inside by the band, say thank you for supporting us. There can be a QR code that links to their Spotify or their Bandcamp in there.
Totally.
It's not, and they can sell those products on their Bandcamp too. Wow. I mean, bands who are listening, labels who are listening, go out and find stuff that you want, buy it at wholesale and sell it. That's crazy. That's really cool.
Everyone wants to know how to be distributed, and if you're going on tour, you are a distributor.
You're just
you're going to be cities and
yes. There was a distribution company in Canada that was an independent company, and they got some government funding to pursue this idea of having artists who are on tour bringing merch with them and dropping it off in local record stores as a distributor / shipping, because they're already on the roads. You know what I mean? Right. It's kind of a cool concept.
What an interesting idea.
From a revenue perspective, I like your prospects a lot more. There's so many diverse ways that you are making a living, and you can make a living, not just selling records, but the services that you mentioned, which, by the way, your lathe cutting services are really, really cheap. You should adjust for inflation, because I'm like, it's very affordable.
But remember, these are mono embossed; they're not the diamond cut ones. So
sure, okay, sure, but still, it's makes a lot of sense for people to check it out. You do events. Talk to me about this idea, this multiple revenue approach, and this kind of, to borrow a stock market, like this diverse portfolio. Of all the things that you and your partner do, and how that contributes to your personal financial security.
Sure. I mean, it's been really nice to see the change from, maybe we pay the mortgage once a year and pay for everything we're making, to paying for everything we're making and paying the mortgage 8 times a year, from this.
Yeah.
And it just, it's always been sort of a dream, but not one that I knew how to achieve. And so it's taken all this time, I feel, to sort of gain the knowledge by doing it on my own. And maybe if I could go back in time and talk to the younger me, actually, I did take your course right around when you started, giving. I
remember that. Yep.
That was pretty quick. But, I took some music business classes at Berkeley. I wish I would have taken more business classes when I was younger, just to sort of get my footing. But the diversification has definitely been the most important piece for this. Like, one of the big things that I think we didn't realize we could do was get in touch with colleges and universities and do like lectures and talks and demonstrations, because they often have a much bigger budget than your local library will, and are often looking for programming. So that's, I would say going out and doing talks and lectures has been probably the biggest thing that we've learned that is necessary to sort of boost our personal finance levels, which has led us to be a lot more adventurous with some of the stuff we're releasing, which often pays off and sometimes doesn't, but that's okay. We're still making cool things.
Oh, absolutely. And then sometimes the diversification thing is not just about, if everything makes $1 a day and you need to make, $200 a day, you need 200 things. It's not just about that. To me, it's about, you really don't know what fans are going to respond to, what the market's going to respond to, as much as you think you can predict it. You do these things that are kind of crazy, and you take a chance, and all of a sudden it becomes 25% of your income that month or that
Right.
year. And so that's kind of one of the things I've learned is that it's just try things, and 90% should, 50% will flop, 40% will break even or do okay, and then 10% should blow you away and really surprise you,
Definitely.
and take care of you.
Yeah, we've had two zines. I would say that those percentages work with our zines that we've released.
Okay, good. I just pulled them out of the air.
I like that idea though. Between the two of us, we've probably made, nearing on 500 zines at this point, like unique, different zines that we've sold over the past 20 years. And we've had a few that, every zine we put out, we make because we like doing it. We have an idea we want to write, we publish it. But I did one with a friend of mine, Gina, called Gina and Joe Talk About Queer Horror. And Katie has one called Kitchen Witch that she did with her friend Nadine. And both of those have sold over 3,000 copies now. And it's just,
unbelievable.
Neither of us expected them to sell very much. It was just another one of the zines that we made. But you really don't know. And I think that's like the biggest piece of advice I give when I talk to like college classes or, when I do an event and talk to people is you can't be that precious with your stuff to sit on it forever, waiting for it to be perfect.
Yeah.
You kind of have to just keep putting things out and getting your name out there and seeing what takes hold and following that.
I mean, I've learned that lesson so many times in my career, and I still forget it. But I remember one time, the very first time I learned that was I did a 3-song EP in a recording studio with a producer, big time session musicians. It was like, it ended up being over $2,000 a song, manufactured and everything. And like the CD did okay. It was not good at all. And then in my spare time, I did like a bunch of demos on my laptop and released those independently. And that sold like crazy. And I had to reprint it 3 times, and it won an award. And and it was like, that was just a great lesson of like, you can't predict it. The same thing happens. I'll do an album, like a studio album I work on for 3 years, and then I'll do an acoustic version of that album. And then sometimes the acoustic version does better than the main album.
Right.
But I think that should be so encouraging for creatives.
I think so too. The biggest thing, Katie always says this, I forget who the quote was from, but it's about like being a collector. And the idea is, say you're an art collector, collect the art that you love so that even if it doesn't appreciate in value, you have something that you love. And I feel that way about the releases that we do. So we have the next issue of Hit the Decks coming out. It's called What's Your Favorite Record? And I interviewed some labels. I have some longer pieces people wrote. There's some poems, there's some art, but I also just had people send me 1 to 3 sentences about what their favorite record is. And I've gotten about 40 of those, 40 or 50 of them. I'm just going to pepper them through the magazine. Yeah. And we're doing a 12-inch lathe cut with it, entirely of music from people on my mailing list.
Oh, cool.
And the idea is like, this is not going to be the biggest record I ever put out. It's not going to be the biggest zine I ever make. But honestly, odds are it sells better than most of the stuff I do because it's fun to make and people like the idea. And it's like, it's sort of the idea of like being a part of your community and not just saying that you have a community. That's something that I can sort of get mad at record labels about, is like having a name for their followers and talking about what a great community they are, and then offering almost nothing to the community beyond selling them things. Wow.
That's a great point. I think some people are going to feel convicted by that. I think, I think of that zine idea, and there's just something going back to what I was saying about the physical analog world is there's some people just take physical things more seriously. And oftentimes I'll see a Reddit thread where it's like, what's your favorite album of all time? And best vinyl you own in your collection. And people will all post these things, and every answer is wildly different. And 0% of the time do I actually Google those albums or add those to my Apple Music library. I just don't have the time. I'm reading this standing in the line somewhere, and I just can't do that. As opposed to sitting on the couch reading a zine and somebody saying, I am obsessed with this Shania Twain record. You have to check it out. You've dismissed it. You should go check it out. And you know what I mean? And I'd be like, okay, maybe I will.
I mean, you hit the nail right on the head. That's exactly what it is. You know, I'm sitting here designing the zine, reading things people send to me and putting the album on.
Oh my gosh.
I've never listened to a full Jethro Tull album, but now I have because someone recommended it. You know,
that's so funny. Okay, I have an exact same story about a Jethro Tull record, but like I have this like cassette player that I leave out for people, and somebody had left a cassette next to it, like almost like I don't know where they like it was like they had it kicking around and they're just like they gave it to me because they're like I don't know why I have this, and it was a Jethro Tull cassette, and I was like I'm gonna listen to this. Like I have no idea what this band sounds like. I know them, but I have no idea. And I was like, oh, it's a good band.
Right? Yeah. No. In my mind, it was just well, I know there's a flute, but that was the only thing I knew.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that's amazing. Talk to me about these. We got to run. Talk to me about these lathe cutters and what you've got going on here. This is like, you know, I've done a couple episodes talking about lathe. Lathe is the technology that will not go away. It is like, you know, and there's something more and more interesting to it. And the way that I know how you've been using it is very intriguing to me, and I think will be intriguing to the listeners. So tell me about how you got into this and what you're doing with them now.
Sure. So I had a 5-inch square lathe record made up 13 years ago by this guy, Mike Dixon, in Arizona, of just some songs I was noodling around with. And when I was working with Joyful Noise making zines, he was doing lathe cutting for them. So we sort of re-entered each other's orbits. And then 2 years ago, I flew down to Arizona and bought one of the machines from him and spent a weekend. He does these lathe cut camps. So I sort of learned how to use it, came home, and it was so good that within maybe 6 months, we bought the second one, which is actually this one here behind me that Katie trained up on. So now she's cutting on that. And then this one on this side is one that I just built out of pieces that I've been buying.
Wow.
So we now have 3 record lathes. And, you know, the quality is way better than anyone is probably thinking they're going to be. Lathes used to not make great records. And if someone doesn't really know what they're doing, is using a beat up lathe they haven't fixed very well, it's going to make a terrible record. But I would say ours are probably like 80 to 90% fidelity of a pressed record.
Wow.
And so for us, it's really about the playfulness. You know, I've done a few records, and to release a record and make money on it, especially as a label for another band, you have to do at least 200, 300 copies for the price point to make any sense.
Yeah.
But the lathes cost about as much as pressing 2 records, depending on what quality lathe you're getting. And now, you know, if someone comes to me with an idea, they want to make 20 records of, you know, them reading a book out loud while someone plays violin, we can just do it. It costs us nothing to make the records once we have the machines. So we've been really having fun just thinking of all the different wild ideas we can do now that we can make a record any minute of the day.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. That is really exciting. And I mean, it's not, and again, all of a sudden now you are enshrining this moment onto an analog format, and people take it more seriously, and it becomes a collectible item.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's a lathe. I think it's from the 70s, or it's from the 80s. So it's probably a 7-inch, but it is an interview. Like it's just a quick conversation. And I think it's a bootleg. So it was like somebody had this tape recording of interviewing a pop star in the bathroom. And then it was, and I mean, obviously I don't put it on for a dinner party, but like owning it's meaningful to me. I think it's really cool.
Right. And if you want to hear it, that's probably the only way you're going to hear it. That's
true. Yeah.
I mean, the other thing is, you know, so I work a lot with Joe Jack Talcum, one of the Dead Milkmen. And, you know, he's got a great studio in his house, I think in the basement of his house or one of the bedrooms. And, you know, he makes really fantastic sounding songs. Do they need to be audio, quadraphonic audio quality? No. They sound about as good on the lathe-cut record as they probably would on a pressed record. Like, there's a point at which, what are you looking for? Are you looking for the interesting art object that you have in your house, that you hold on your hands, that, forces you to listen to the album from start to finish?
Yeah.
Or are you looking for some, ecstatic experience of like sound hallucinations? And they're two really different things.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, are you saying that certain genres lend themselves better to lathe than others?
Yes. Lathes add a lot of bass. They add a lot of like heaviness. They add some scratching to the sound. I would say a majority of the hip hop, folk music, and like and some electronica that I cut, I prefer the sound on the lathe, even when it's a noisy cut. It gives it that, this is a record I've had for 30 years quality. Not always. I get really clean cuts too. Just like any other record, it depends on the file I've been given. But there are even ways in which I can make a record sound louder, make the actual recordness of it sound louder. And sometimes I do that because I think that's a cool sound.
Right. So what kind of projects are you making? What kind of things are people doing with these lathes that in turn customers are responding to?
So the one that was the most fun last year that people really responded to was something we called on the record poetry. Was one of the first big projects that Katie and I worked on together as Consonant Collective. And we had 6 poets who read their work. So we released a chapbook of the poetry and then a record of their reading. But each record had something to do with the poems. And so the first was one of my books, Dark Nature. And so the records were shaped like leaves. And so that was really interesting because it's difficult to find poetry on record, especially of smaller poets, poets who aren't especially well known. And this was a very interesting way. I felt it was just very intimate to hear the actual poet reading. And the lathes have a really wonderful way of sounding like they're in the room with you. It gives it a very like warm, personal touch. So that was just one of the perfect projects to marry the lathes with everything else we've been doing.
And so you're saying it's like, I would imagine it's arduous and expensive, but you're saying it's not that much risk to try to cut something.
Yeah, I mean, you're gonna need a few thousand up front to buy the machine and to buy all the supplies. No one's going out and buying a lathe and then being rich,
Yeah.
But we've had them about a year and a half, and we just about caught up paying everything off. And once that happened, I buy sheets of plastic at 8 foot by 4 foot and cut the records, have a CNC place cut the records for me that we use. And usually it comes out to a 7-inch record. The materials are only about $1.25 a record.
Oh, cool.
Then the biggest thing is time.
Yeah.
And because it's our project and our label and we have the time to put towards it. Which is why people look at lathes and say, why is it so expensive? But, if you want to cut a 12-inch record that's got 22 minutes of music on each side, I have to stand at the machine for 22 minutes for each side, making sure it's clean right. So, it's a huge investment of time. But if you're the one making the records for yourself, what is time? It's your own work.
I think people just don't realize that about lathes. And I mean, so then when you do that, I mean, I know you're not doing many 12 inches. I think you're not doing many 12 inches, but when you're doing a 6-inch, 7-inch, 8-inch record, and you're putting some sort of package together, like what kind of profit margins, like what are fans okay with spending on this? If it comes with a few other things, maybe a digital download, but also, a zine or something more than just the record, like, how's that working out?
Sure. Well, that was one of the bigger jumps from tapes to records to lathes. Because, a cassette, if we did a zine and a cassette, we were usually spending like $3 to $5 on supplies and selling them for $12 to $15. And then after we take out costs, we split it between us and the artist. So no one was seeing too much money from that.
Yeah.
The lathes, honestly, haven't changed the price that much, the price of costs. Okay. So, for a 10-inch record, it's usually between $5 and $8 for us to make each one. Again, not counting time. We have to print the sleeves, we have to construct the sleeves, all that.
Yeah.
But we usually sell those for about $24 each.
Okay.
So now we're seeing that we're able to pay the artists and pay ourselves about twice as much as we were 2 years ago, which really opens the doors to us making more things and doing more.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. That's great to hear. And so do you think that vinyl is still growing, it's still getting popular, so that must mean that there's like a trickle down growth to lathes as well. Is that true?
I would say so. A lot of people are interested in hiring me to make records for them. And one of the really neat things about lathes is that the explosion of the vinyl industry has mostly hit people who aren't finally like attuned to the music industry. So it's been like, Chappell Roan and Taylor Swift records and, bigger records like that to an audience that maybe wasn't so into records. But now I'm getting people who are going into my local record store looking for a record, a pretty big size record, and going, there's a square record here and it's clear and it's got the Gremlins soundtrack on it. And then so I'm finding a lot of people, especially online, who are posting being like, popped over to Repo Records to buy a couple records, and I found this super weird looking 6-inch record. And so it's really neat to see like these like funny, like, half art object, half music object pieces showing up all over the place.
Well, we can't forget that, like, I got to think 99% of the people who buy records are collectors, that they have that collector DNA or virus, more like it, in them. And so when they see weird things, they're like, I've got to have that in my collection. The weirder, the better when you're a collector.
Yeah. I can't tell you how many times someone comes up to me and goes, you made this yourself? And I go, yeah. And then they just buy it. Just the fact that someone made a record at home is worth buying. And I think that's really cool. Not just because I'm the one selling it, but I probably would have bought it too. Yeah.
Well, the small quantities too. There's a lot of people who feel special about knowing that this is one of 50 or one of 5.
Yeah. And it is special.
Yeah, for sure. I can't remember if I asked you this, and I don't know the answer to it, but consonant, where does that come from? And like, why was that the name of the, aside from sounding really darn cool, Consonant Collective?
Yeah, no, we wanted something that was going to, like, first and foremost say books and writing and language.
Cool.
Katie's zine name was the La Theory, which is the idea that all language came from sound and song, that people hummed and clicked and whistled before they spoke. So we wanted to make sure that our name said this is something both musical, auditory, and words. We wanted to sort of, before we really even knew what we were doing, we had the idea of what we wanted it to be, and that word both sounded cool and really, I think, amplifies what it is we're doing.
It's one of those things where it's so open to interpretation in a good way. It's like a song that has a meaning to the author, but it's not, it's not obvious, and so everyone can kind of attach their own meaning to it, but yet there is something underlying there's an underlying thread that we all kind of understand.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah,
I think so. I think it's great. It's one of those great names. Joe, Katie, thank you so much for doing this. It's been great to chat with you, and I love what you're doing. I love watching what you're doing. I love telling people about your tagline. And I'm excited to see kind of like how things grow for you as you keep experimenting and pivoting and trying new things.
Yeah, well, thank you, Scott. I'll tell you, your podcast and your record course and your Clarity Call have been pretty instrumental in the growth of what I'm doing. Especially, when I think about the courses I paid for, like listening to your podcast is a full course on its own. It's like,
that's great.
It's fantastic.
Yeah, that's great. Well, now people can listen to this, and now they're going to be inspired to make a storefront for themselves and to take more kind of chances with their label.
Wonderful. I hope so.